Welcome to the Thinking Abyss podcast, a philosophical journey through consciousness, reality, and the phenomena that challenge our understanding of existence. From ancient wisdom to cutting-edge theories, we explore where philosophy meets science and curiosity leads to the edge of the unknown.
Okay, let's unpack this. So today we're diving into something that is, well, it's deeply personal. It's something I think every single person listening has felt probably this week, maybe even this morning.
Oh, absolutely.
That strange, sweet, kind of peculiar ache that just makes you stop whatever you're doing,
Yeah.
You stare off into the distance, completely lost in this ghost of a memory.
Yeah.
We are diving into the architecture of longing. We're talking about nostalgia.
And it is so much more than just, a passing feeling of wistfulness. The material you and I looked at, it dissects nostalgia not just as a sentiment, but as a really complex, often contradictory force.
A force.
Yeah, a psychological one, a cultural one, even a political one. It is, at its core, a deep analysis of what happens when the human mind, both individually and, collectively, tries to look backward.
So our mission today is to really get into the weeds on this. We want to understand not just what nostalgia is, but how this constant longing actively rewrites our personal pasts.
And our collective past. And critically, how it shapes the world we're living in right now, the policies, the things we buy, all of it.
The immediate hook here, the thing that just grabs you, is the sheer unexpected power of it.
It's visceral.
It really is. The sources describe it perfectly. You're driving, right? It's a completely ordinary Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
You're thinking about groceries or a meeting, and then a song comes on the radio.
Right.
A song you haven't heard in, 15, 20 years?
Yeah.
Maybe it's something you'd be a little embarrassed to admit you liked. But the second that chorus hits, it is not Tuesday anymore.
Not at all.
You're instantly 17 again. You're in your friend's dimly lit basement, and you're just overwhelmed with this feeling of absolute unbreakable certainty that this moment, this hope, this friendship, this is going to last forever.
And then comes the part that's just so strange.
You have to pull the car over.
Right. You realize your eyes have just filled with tears. And it's not for anything happening now, not for a current tragedy. It's for a person you aren't anymore.
And for a world, an exact moment in time, it doesn't exist. It's gone.
That intense, involuntary, completely unexpected return, that's the defining characteristic. That's the flood. And a crucial element the research highlights is that this emotional power makes nostalgia, in a way, the only time machine we actually have.
And this is the central paradox, right? The painful joke our brain plays on us. This time machine is hopelessly broken.
Hopelessly.
It only goes backward. It never actually gets you to the real past, just this spectral version of it. And yet we can't stop using it. We are compelled to.
And if we look at the word itself, which the source materials really push us to do, we see that ache baked right in.
Yeah, the etymology is pretty dark.
It is. The term was coined in the 17th century. A Swiss physician treating mercenary soldiers who were, far from home. It's from two Greek words, nostos, which means return home.
And algos, which means pain.
Exactly. It was literally diagnosed as a medical condition,
Yeah.
a debilitating, sometimes fatal form of melancholy.
It's like a disease.
Profound homesickness, yeah. It was quite literally the pain of not being able to return home. We've reclassified it since, obviously, but that original diagnosis was fundamentally correct. It is the pain of the unattainable.
So let's get right to the core of it then.
Mm-hmm.
Because if this feeling is an ache for home, but the physical, geographical home is gone.
Right.
The house was torn down, or it's renovated so much you don't even recognize it. Or the people who made it home, they're gone. They've moved or they've passed on.
Mm-hmm.
What exactly is the home that nostalgia is aching for?
That's the question. And the research confirms it's not about space, it's about time. The home nostalgia is looking for doesn't exist on a map.
It exists on a timeline.
It exists only in time. And because time only moves forward, the second that moment existed, it ceased to exist in reality. It's an ache for a feeling, for the emotional architecture of a moment.
Wow.
That intense transport you described when you pull the car over. That is the feeling of realizing you are completely and totally stranded in the present, mourning a state of being that is forever impossible to get back to.
So it's always a state of mind.
It's never a place.
Okay, so let's dive into the mechanics. Memory versus nostalgia. Because the sources are really clear. They're not the same thing.
Not at all.
We all know that human memory is, a notoriously unreliable narrator. That's basic psychology. But what the material suggests is that nostalgia doesn't just use this unreliability.
Yeah.
It weaponizes it.
It weaponizes it. That's a perfect way to put it. It makes the past more powerful because it's untrue.
How does that work?
Well, this is the core psychological mechanism the research really unpacks. And it's a key concept to understand everything, not just our own lives, but like all of history. We don't actually remember the original event.
Okay.
We remember the last time we remembered the event.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it's like making a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy.
Precisely. That is the perfect analogy. Every time you retrieve a memory, you're also reconstructing it. You're modifying it. Details get dropped, new ones get added, the context shifts a little.
And with each copy, the image gets a little grainier, a little more distorted.
Exactly. And nostalgia is like a hyper-efficient editor in this process. It speeds the whole thing up. It acts like a meticulous curator going through your memories and selecting these very specific, highly charged emotional fragments to keep.
And it throws away the rest.
It ruthlessly discards or just minimizes anything that might spoil the mood, anything that creates, cognitive dissonance. It protects the golden-hued feeling.
We see this play out in those classic nostalgic stories that everyone has. The universal hits,
The highlight reel.
Yeah, highlight reel. You remember the endless summer? That perfect shimmering chain of beach days or just hanging out in someone's basement?
The feeling that it would never end.
Right. Or you remember the unbreakable friend group or that family dinner that was in your memory, just perpetual laughter and warmth? It's the best possible version. Perfectly lit, perfect soundtrack.
But here's the exercise the research suggests, the thing that reveals the trick. Try right now to remember the specific searing detail of the argument that happened right before the laughter at that dinner.
Oof.
Or try to remember the profound existential boredom that actually made up, 90% of that so-called endless summer?
Or the deep, crushing insecurity you were feeling when you were 17 with that unbreakable friend group.
You can't. Or you can, but you have to work much harder to get those details. And when you do, they feel separate, detached from the main memory.
Because nostalgia has already done the work.
It has already done the heavy lifting. It's cleaned up the past, swept away the clutter, and it's given you the greatest hits compilation of your own life. It's a beautiful documentary, but we have to be honest with ourselves and admit that it is functionally a work of fiction.
Okay, so if we are such good editors of our own past, then here's where it gets really interesting. This whole process, this curation of fragments, it actually tells us everything about who we are now.
That is the ultimate conclusion. That's the big reveal from the psychological research. Nostalgia is, in a way, temporally self-serving. It's not really about the past at all.
What is it about then?
It's about the present, seen through this very specific tinted rearview mirror. And that mirror only shows us what we need to see right now to validate our current emotional state.
So what we choose to be nostalgic for, the specific thing we're longing for, that's a clue.
It's a direct reflection of what we feel we lack now. It's a signpost pointing to a missing value or a current anxiety we're dealing with. The past becomes a tool we use to manage the present.
Can you give us an example of how that works, how it points to a dissatisfaction today?
Sure, let's take two really common ones. Let's say you find yourself constantly romanticizing your college years. The late-night debates, the intellectual excitement, the feeling of freedom.
A lot of people feel that.
A lot of people do. But the research suggests that longing isn't just a simple statement that college was objectively better. It's often a way of mourning a very specific, measurable dissatisfaction in your current life. Maybe it's the lost freedom that comes with a mortgage and a 9-to-5 job. Or it's the lack of deep intellectual stimulation in your work. Or maybe you just miss those low-stakes, easy social connections that are harder to find as an adult.
You're not missing the past, you're missing what the past had that you don't have now.
Precisely. Or another one. If you find yourself fixating on the security and, the moral clarity of your childhood, you're very likely grieving a loss of psychological stability or a sense of control in your current, often chaotic adult life.
So the intensity of the nostalgia tells you more about your anxiety level today than it does about what it was actually like back then.
The past is a diagnostic tool for the present.
Which means we're constantly rewriting our own history.
Yeah.
We're not just passive observers of our memories, we're actively shaping them to build a narrative that helps us make sense of the struggle of today.
Yes. That devastating breakup you had when you were 20, the one that felt like the end of the world.
Right.
By the time you're 40, that's been rewritten. It's now the crucible relationship that taught me who I really was.
It has to have a purpose in the story.
The narrative arc has to provide closure. It has to make it feel like the pain was worth it to get you to where you are now. We edit out the sheer humiliation, the long, boring stretches of sadness, or we reframe those setbacks as, necessary trials.
That boring town you grew up in where nothing ever happened.
Suddenly becomes simpler times or a place of lost authenticity because your life now feels too fast and complicated. The past is being actively manufactured right now by us.
And we do it because we need a coherent story. A story where we're the hero who evolved and made it through.
We use the curated past to justify the present state of the self. It's a collaboration, in a way, between you now and all the versions of you that came before, all working together to build a story that ensures your psychological continuity.
That's fascinating. It's a survival mechanism.
It's an adaptive function. It maintains your self-esteem and makes sure the current you can draw a straight, even if it's a fictionalized line back to the past you. But it all relies on the past being, made of clay. It has to be malleable.
Okay, building on that idea of a personally curated past, now let's scale it up. Let's go to the collective level. And here's something from the sources that is, I think, simultaneously terrifying and kind of comforting. Nostalgia does not require actual firsthand experience.
No, it doesn't.
You can miss something you never lived through.
Yeah.
And entire generations can miss the exact same fictional moment together.
This is where we move beyond just personal memory and into the huge, powerful realm of cultural or collective nostalgia. And the research is clear. It's one of the most pervasive shaping forces in modern culture.
And you see it everywhere once you start looking for it. It's almost comical. People born in, say, 1995, who were literal toddlers when the decade ended, feeling this deep, genuine nostalgia for the music, the fashion, the vibe of the 1980s.
Or the widespread yearning for small-town values. You see this among millions of people who live in cities or suburbs who have never spent any significant time in a small town.
Right, and they have no idea about the economic limitations or the lack of privacy or the often rigid social rules that can come with that environment.
Or think about the way we romanticize historical aesthetics, like the European cobblestone look, these beautiful, ancient, narrow streets. We long for that, but we conveniently filter out the centuries of, rampant poverty, no sanitation, intense class division, and high infant mortality that were the reality of life in those beautiful places.
We're not really encountering these eras directly. We only know them through artifacts.
Curated artifacts, highly aestheticized ones, films, music, stories, and now the endless filters on social media that are designed to mimic old analog film.
Which means we're all, to some extent, operating under this massive shared delusion, this myth versus reality gap.
The huge one.
The sources are so clear on this. The 1950s were not happy days. The 1990s, which are having a huge nostalgia moment right now, were not a time of carefree simplicity. They were full of economic anxiety and social unrest and grunge.
Every single era was complicated and anxious and uncertain to the people who are actually living through it. Complexity and anxiety are always the first casualties when we look back.
All that's left from a distance is the style,
the aesthetic, the vibe, and the simple, easy-to-digest story. And this is where the tremendous binding power of this collective invention comes from. When an entire generation or a huge chunk of society agrees to remember something that wasn't quite real, a perfect 50s, a simple 90s, that false memory becomes bigger than any one person's truth.
It becomes culturally real.
It becomes culturally real. And that shared, fabricated mythology, once it's accepted, becomes a kind of foundational truth for a culture's identity.
And its politics.
Absolutely. It shapes what we buy, which we'll get into, but it also shapes who we think we are. People define themselves by these invented pasts, and we are governed and marketed to and organized as if that collective invention were actual history.
It's a shortcut.
It lets us bypass the messy reality and rally around a standardized, easily consumable narrative of what was and what we've lost. The collective longing for a past that never existed is often a more powerful social glue than the actual shared present we all live in.
So let's make that transition from what feels like harmless personal sentiment to the political dimension. Because this is where nostalgia stops being just wistful and becomes a really potent systemic force in society.
Yeah, this is a major focus of the research.
The sources state, pretty unequivocally, that every major reactionary movement in recorded history, from ancient Rome to modern-day populism, is fundamentally fueled by some form of nostalgia.
The structure is chillingly identical. It's almost like a political formula you can apply across cultures and centuries.
What's the formula?
It's a three-step architecture. First, there was a golden age, a perfect past. Second, we have fallen from it, a crisis in the present. And third, we must return to it, which becomes the political mandate.
So the political rhetoric just fills in the blanks. Restore traditional values, make Rome great again, or, make America great again.
It's the same structure every time.
And the sources have this powerful insight. The fact that the Golden Age is almost always a fictional construct. That's not a flaw in the strategy. It's actually a necessary advantage.
It's more than an advantage. It's essential. A real historical past would be messy. It would be full of contradictions, moral ambiguities, things that are really inconvenient if you're trying to rally people into a single passionate movement.
Real history needs nuance.
And nuance is the enemy of mobilization, but a mythical past that can be pure, it can be simple, it can be used as a perfect, untainted weapon against a complex and frustrating present. A real past is an obstacle. A mythical past is high-octane fuel.
Yeah, so the source material requires us to be impartial here. The core idea of conservative politics is often, by definition, nostalgic. To conserve or to return to a previous state. That's not inherently a bad thing.
Exactly. The issue arises when that conservatism crosses over into what's called reactionary or restorationist politics. The question isn't whether history matters, it always does. The question is which specific past is being romanticized, and more importantly, for whom was that past actually golden?
Right. And this brings us to the dark truth that the research forces us to confront. When someone says, often with complete sincerity, things were better in the 1950s.
There is almost always an unspoken addendum hiding just beneath the surface.
Which is?
For people like me, for people who fit the prescribed societal mold of that time.
Because for huge segments of the population, those golden ages were systematically places of exclusion and oppression.
Absolutely. The research reminds us that while certain groups historically in America, often white, middle-class men, might have had relative economic stability and a sense of social consensus, that stability was packaged with profound systemic exclusion.
We're talking about state-sanctioned segregation.
Deep-seated institutional homophobia, extremely limited options for women politically, socially, economically. Every single golden age narrative in any culture has its shadows. It has its oppressed populations whose suffering is surgically removed from the nostalgic political story.
So political nostalgia requires that same selective memory we talked about at the personal level, but just writ large.
Enforced culturally and politically. And the huge cost of this societal addiction to a fictional past is that it actively prevents us from looking forward. It can stall progress entirely.
Because if the best possible future is already behind us, then any kind of change or innovation is a threat.
That is the core tension. Innovation, technological, social, economic. It moves society further away from that mythical past, whether it's the 1950s or some imagined pre-industrial village. So change itself becomes synonymous with loss and decline, not opportunity.
And all this political energy gets spent trying to turn back the clock.
Energy that could be spent solving our actual present-day problems gets diverted into fighting these cultural wars, all aimed at reclaiming a utopia that was never real to begin with.
But the source material does offer this fascinating counterintuitive twist. Progressive nostalgia.
Yes, it's much less common, but the analysis suggests it can be a really radical force.
So what is it? It sounds like a contradiction.
It's the yearning for futures that were promised but never arrived, or for potential that was squandered. Think about those boundless, optimistic visions from the 1960s about what the year 2000 would be like.
Flying cars, jetpacks.
And more than that, widespread automation that would free us from boring labor, technology solving scarcity and disease, deep global cooperation. What we got instead was, increasing inequality and surveillance capitalism.
So progressive nostalgia demands the future we were promised.
Exactly. It uses that past potential, that glorious, plausible timeline that felt within our grasp, as a revolutionary standard to judge our disappointing present against.
So if reactionary nostalgia says, let's go back to the way it was,
progressive nostalgia says, let's finish building the amazing future we started but never completed. Both are rooted in a sense of loss, but one looks backward in fear, trying to rewind the tape. The other looks at a horizon that should be closer and demands to know why we stopped moving toward it.
Okay, now let's go to the marketplace. Because capitalism, that great devourer of all human experience, figured out how profitable nostalgia is a long, long time ago.
And has been mining it ruthlessly ever since.
Yeah, we are living in an age of industrial nostalgia. Mass-produced longing is not just a side effect, it's a core business model.
And it's a process that is so reliable, it's become highly predictable. On a cycle, every few years, another decade gets revived, repackaged, and resold.
To new generations who never lived it, and to older generations who want a quick emotional fix.
Right. You see the fashion, the music, the specific aesthetic markers all coming back with this predictable regularity. You have huge cultural products like Stranger Things, which is basically a machine designed to sell 1980s aesthetics and tropes to an audience that was mostly born in the 2000s.
And the vinyl comeback, the endless re-releases of 90s sneakers for like 5 times the original price. Reboots, remakes.
It's endless stream.
And this isn't just, an organic cultural thing bubbling up from the people. This is planned. It's designed and marketed by trend forecasters who calculate exactly when a past moment is ripe for commercial exploitation.
The research on this is so specific, they've identified a magic number. The 20-year cycle.
20 years.
That's the typical timeline for a generation to get old enough to have disposable income, but be far enough away from their youth to really feel that ache. They become the prime market.
So the 80s came back in the 2000s.
The 90s and early 2000s are dominant right now in the 2020s. And based on this industrial calculation, we can predict with near certainty that by 2035, we're going to see a massive nostalgia wave for the culture of 2015.
Wow. Get ready for it. I don't even know.
Whatever specific mobile games and Instagram filter trends were happening then, it's coming.
What the research finds so insidious about this, though, is how it systematically strips the past of its actual meaning.
Yes. It keeps the aesthetic shell, but it empties it of all substance.
It's just a look.
It creates a form of consumption that's all about the appearance of the past, with zero engagement with the context or the difficulty of that past. The classic example is the Nirvana t-shirt.
You see it everywhere.
It functions as nostalgia as costume. It's completely divorced from the substance of grunge, the economic anxiety of the early 90s, the cultural moment that produced that sound. You're just buying the logo, the vibe, as a performance of cool. The actual meaning has been eliminated by mass production.
And the cruel irony is that it's often targeted at people who have no memory to challenge the fiction. Teenagers wearing 90s fashion who learned about the decade from, a 30-second TikTok video?
Or a Netflix show that already curated it for them. That's pure simulation. It's nostalgia that is completely severed from lived experience.
And yet it works perfectly.
It works because, as we said in the first section, nostalgia was always a simulation. It was always a manufactured feeling for something that never quite existed. Commercialization just systematizes that fabrication for us and turns it into a scalable product.
But the sources are careful not to be totally cynical about this. There is a genuine need under all this.
A deep psychological need that the market is exploiting.
And that need is for stability.
It's a resistance to rapid change. We live in an era of insane acceleration. Socially, technologically, our jobs, our relationships, they change at a pace that our brains can barely keep up with.
So manufactured nostalgia offers a quick fix.
It's an easily consumed promise of stability. A promise of a time when things felt slower, when your identity felt more fixed. It's a temporary, commercially delivered balm for the vertigo of constant, overwhelming change.
Okay, let's shift to the digital age, because our devices and our platforms have created this really strange new phenomenon the research calls preemptive nostalgia.
Yeah, this is a truly modern twist. We are actively creating it in real time.
We're not just documenting the present to remember it. We're doing it to manufacture future nostalgia. Is that right?
That's it. We're staging and filtering our photos and videos not necessarily to capture the moment as it's truly happening, but to create the perfect, idealized artifact that our future self will look back on and feel wistful about.
So the present moment becomes raw material for a future memory.
Exactly.
Which leads to that profound paradox of presence. We barely experience the actual messy, unfiltered version of our lives because we're too busy creating the documented version.
We're watching the concert through our phone screen.
Right.
We're spending the entire vacation trying to get the perfect shot instead of just enjoying the view.
The sources call platforms like Instagram nostalgia factories.
High-efficiency nostalgia factories. Every choice, the angle, the golden hour light, the vintage filter, the carefully casual pose, it's all a form of pre-curation. We're designing our lives to be maximally nostalgia-worthy.
We're prefabricating our own false memories.
We're doing the algorithms work for it in advance. And the wild thing is, it works.
Mm-hmm.
Years later, you scroll back through those curated photos and you feel genuine, deep nostalgia for a moment you barely even inhabited when it was happening.
But this creates a huge problem, right? The archive problem. If nostalgia needs gaps and haziness to work its magic, what happens when our entire life is perfectly life-logged?
Logically, it should destroy it.
Every photo, every message, every song, it's all in the cloud, available for perfect high-def replay.
The logic suggests that perfect documentation should make nostalgic reconstruction unnecessary. If you can retrieve everything perfectly, you don't need to fictionalize it.
But that's not what happens.
The reality observed in the studies is the exact opposite. Total documentation makes nostalgia more potent, not less.
How?
Because we no longer have to rely on our flawed biological memory. Our phones and the platforms themselves have become powerful, personalized nostalgia engines.
They've taken over the job of the curator.
Completely. The algorithms now decide which moments from 5 or 10 years ago to show you. They do the filtering, they show you the most liked photo, the highlight reel from the vacation, the celebratory post. And they hide the mundane, the boring, the embarrassing.
So the past is no longer something we work to retrieve.
It's something that is effortlessly delivered to us, perfectly filtered and optimized to trigger that bittersweet, commercially useful emotional response. We become passive consumers of our own manufactured past.
All right, let's pivot to the physical. Let's get neurological. When we feel that sudden, powerful ache of longing, what is actually physically happening inside our brains, the source materials is really specific here.
It does. We can actually map the brain regions involved. And what's key is that nostalgia activates a whole network, not just one spot. We see areas for emotional regulation and reward lighting up.
So which parts are we talking about?
Specifically, you see activation in the medial prefrontal cortex, which is crucial for self-reflection, the hippocampus, of course, which retrieves the autobiographical details. But then you also get the amygdala, which processes intense emotion, working alongside the ventral striatum.
And the ventral striatum is a major hub for
The dopamine-driven reward system, pleasure, motivation. It's a literal neurochemical experience.
which explains the paradox. Even though there's sadness and longing, the involvement of that reward circuit means it actually feels good to be nostalgic.
The sadness, the algos, is real. But the pleasure from the dopamine release, which is associated with social connection and self-relevance, is powerful enough to make the whole experience net positive. It's why we seek it out.
And here's the kicker from the research. The brain doesn't distinguish between a genuine memory and a heavily reconstructed one.
In terms of the emotional response, no. If the emotion is real, the experience is functionally real to the brain, regardless of historical accuracy, which validates everything we've been saying about the past being actively rewritten.
So what's the purpose of all this? What's the adaptive function?
The activation in areas linked to social connection and meaning-making points right to it. The brain uses nostalgia as a powerful self-soother. When people feel lonely or bored or anxious, nostalgia provides an immediate anchor. It runs a script that says, you have a story. You have belonged. You matter.
Can you detail some of those psychological benefits?
Sure. Studies show it measurably boosts self-esteem by reminding you of times you felt competent or loved. It provides psychological grounding by reminding you that you've navigated difficulty before and survived. And the focus on past social connections actually counteracts loneliness and can prompt you to reconnect with people now.
It's a highly effective tool for managing existential distress.
A temporary one, but very effective.
But like any coping mechanism, especially one focused on the past, the sources warn it can become, well, deeply maladaptive if you overuse it.
Oh, absolutely. If it becomes chronic, it's a psychological prison. Maladaptive nostalgia is when you are persistently unable to engage with the present because your entire emotional life is fixated on an idealized past.
And that's linked with
Depression, emotional stagnation, and avoidance of risk. It's the classic archetype of the person who peaked in high school who is always talking about the glory days, which prevents them from investing any emotional capital in their current life. The coping mechanism becomes the cage.
And on a societal level, the research notes a fascinating correlation between a society's focus on nostalgia and its demographic age.
It makes sense. As individuals get older, they naturally have more past to process, so nostalgia increases. But when entire societies age rapidly, there's a risk that the collective focus shifts from innovation and future-oriented change toward preservation, maintenance, and looking backward. The society itself starts to act like it peaked in high school.
Okay, let's talk about one of nostalgia's most seductive and pervasive lies. The belief that things were somehow more authentic or real in the past.
The good old days.
Right. The feeling that people were more sincere, art was more meaningful, life was more visceral, and now everything is shallow and fake.
The research is pretty blunt about this. That feeling is basically a constant of the human experience. It's not a modern observation. Every generation has lamented a loss of authenticity.
It's the same complaint, just with new targets. The ancient Greeks worried that writing would destroy authentic oral culture. The Victorians worried that trains would destroy the authentic experience of travel.
Every shift prompts the same outcry. We've lost something essential, something real.
But the sources argue that authenticity itself is a constructed idea. When we're mourning lost authenticity, what are we actually mourning?
It usually boils down to one of two things: the loss of scarcity or the loss of ignorance.
Okay, break down the loss of scarcity for us.
Things felt more authentic when they were scarce, when they required effort to get, when they weren't universally available. The labor involved hunting for a rare vinyl record, waiting days for film to be developed, spending hours downloading one song on dial-up. That work imbued the experience with a hard-won meaning.
And now everything is instant.
In an era of instant, abundant access, that feeling of value dissipates. We're confusing the labor required to get something with the inherent value of the thing itself. We miss the scarcity, not the object.
And the other side is the loss of ignorance.
Right. Things felt more authentic when we were blissfully ignorant of how they were made, before we saw the mechanism behind the magic.
Like what?
Like, music felt more authentic before documentaries showed us how heavily producers and marketers shape our favorite bands. Traditional cultures felt more authentic before we learned that tradition is often a relatively recent invention, constructed for specific social reasons. We confuse our childhood innocence about the world with the world itself having been innocent.
So a handwritten letter isn't inherently more authentic than an email. A vinyl record isn't more real than a stream.
The research says no. These are fundamentally aesthetic preferences, often tied to that scarcity and ignorance we talked about. But through the powerful lens of nostalgia, we elevate these preferences into moral categories. We say, vinyl is better because it's real.
When what we really mean is, I'm nostalgic for the specific effort and social interactions required to use that technology.
Exactly. The ultimate truth here is that the nostalgia for authenticity is really a longing for a time before we understood how manufactured even the authentic past really was.
It's nostalgia for our own ignorance.
A desire for a simpler perception of reality, not a simpler reality itself. We crave the innocence of not knowing.
Okay, let's focus now on the specific triggers, the things that have this almost unfair power to transport us. The sources highlight two main vectors: physical places and music.
They're incredibly potent.
Physical locations, your childhood home, that street corner, a college library, they become emotionally saturated. The sources call them containers of compressed time.
They hold so much emotional weight, which is exactly why going back is often so disappointing.
Yeah, the return trip can be brutal.
You go back as an adult, and you realize the intense feeling you were searching for didn't come from the physical place. It didn't come from the bricks or the trees.
It came from who you were then.
From who you were, from your relationships, and from your own youthful, now gone belief in what was possible. The place was just the stage.
Which highlights the particular cruelty of something like gentrification.
Oh, absolutely. When the dive bar you loved becomes a luxury condo, or the old market is demolished for a chain coffee shop,
Yeah.
the physical markers of your memory are literally destroyed.
And when the markers are gone,
The memories themselves start to feel less real, less valid. It's like a second loss.
and then there's the opposite. Invented geographical nostalgia, longing for places you've never even been.
Millions of people feel this for places like Paris or Kyoto or New York. They exist as these perfect nostalgic fictions for movies and books. Tourists get there and are often disappointed because they were nostalgic for an idea, not the real messy place.
Now let's talk about music, which might be nostalgia's most powerful vector of all. Proust had his Madeleine cookie. We have a song.
It's immediate. It can transport you across decades with overwhelming specificity.
Why is music so powerful?
It gets fused with emotional and autobiographical information in the brain at this incredibly strong, almost permanent level. It becomes the soundtrack to our formative years. And there's a very specific phenomenon that explains this called the reminiscence bump.
The reminiscence bump.
Yes, studies show that people have this disproportionate nostalgic recall for the music they heard most intensely between the ages of about 12 and 22.
Right in the thick of it.
Exactly. It's the period of intense identity formation, first loves, first heartbreaks, first big ideas. The music of that specific decade gets permanently welded to those intense emotional firsts. It's why every generation is correct when they say their music was the best. It was literally the chemical soundtrack to them becoming who they are.
And of course, streaming services have cracked this code.
They have ruthlessly exploited this neurological vulnerability. They are perfectly optimized nostalgia delivery systems.
Those time capsule playlists.
Or the throwback hits suggestions. They are sophisticated algorithms that know exactly which songs trigger which demographic's most intense nostalgic response. It's nostalgia as a hyper-personalized commercial service served up on demand to keep us emotionally tethered to our most commercially exploitable memories.
Okay, so we've established that nostalgia is fundamentally a form of selective edited memory, a kind of beautiful lie we tell ourselves. Which brings us to the final critical question the sources raise. Is there something morally troubling about this?
On a collective level, yes. On a personal level, the research defends it as a necessary fiction, a form of self-care. But when you scale it up to a societal level, the moral issue becomes really serious. It profoundly misrepresents reality and risks complicity in whitewashing history.
Because the nostalgia for the good old days always, conveniently, forgets who those days were bad for.
You can't cherry-pick the past. That's the ethical hurdle. The sources are clear. If you miss the economic prosperity of, say, the 1950s, you cannot morally separate that from the state-sanctioned segregation and institutional homophobia that were inseparable from that economic structure.
So collective nostalgia that erases the harm done to marginalized groups is, by definition, ethically compromised.
Because it enables an inaccurate and politically dangerous version of the past to take hold.
But let's go back to that defense. The idea that this is a necessary human fiction.
And maybe it is. Maybe we need a curated, bearable past to function in the present. Total, unvarnished honesty about every painful, embarrassing, messy thing that ever happened might be psychologically crushing. So nostalgia in that light is a form of self-regulation, a way to find meaning in things that were painful at the time.
And we also have to talk about the validation gap. Whose nostalgia gets taken seriously?
A huge point in the research. When working-class people get nostalgic for a time of stable union jobs and affordable housing, it's often dismissed in the media as reactionary or unsophisticated.
But when wealthy designers get nostalgic for vintage aesthetics,
it's deemed charming, curatorial, and is immediately monetized into lucrative high-end products. Class and power dictate which memories are considered worthy of collective longing.
So the ethical challenge isn't to stop being nostalgic, which is impossible. It's to be aware of what we're doing.
Precisely. Being nostalgic while knowing you're constructing a fiction, acknowledging the gaps, acknowledging who was harmed, admitting you're seeking comfort, not historical truth, that is vastly different from genuinely believing you are accurately remembering history. Awareness is the key.
So let's look ahead for a moment. The sources give a brief but pretty unsettling glimpse into the future of memory. What happens when our lives are fully life-logged and available for high-def replay in AR or VR?
This is the existential threat to nostalgia as we know it. If you can literally re-experience any moment with perfect accuracy, does that kill the romance? Does perfect recall reveal that nothing was as good as we remember and the fiction just shatters?
Or does it make it worse?
Paradoxically, it might make the longing more intense because you can see and hear and almost touch a reality that is still and forever will be physically out of reach. The sense of loss could be exponentially greater.
And even more unsettling is the idea of AI-generated nostalgia.
Imagine memories perfectly calibrated to your psychological needs, completely fabricated by an AI with no basis in anything you actually experienced, a perfect childhood you never had, an ideal relationship that never happened.
But it would satisfy the same brain chemistry.
Exactly, which completely collapses the distinction between authentic memory and constructed nostalgia. And the research soberly concludes that maybe that distinction never really existed in the first place. The fabrication was always the feature, not the bug.
So after all of this, what does it all mean? We've seen nostalgia as pain, as fiction, as a business model, as a political weapon. But at its root, isn't it just our response to the fundamental human condition? The inescapable knowledge that everything we love, every moment, every person, every feeling is temporary.
It is the human brain's most beautiful and most persistent protest against the tyranny of time. Nostalgia is an admission of defeat. We can't stop time, but it's also a profound emotional refusal to accept impermanence quietly. We create these ghostly reconstructions, these beautiful lies to try and cheat loss.
And there is something deeply positive in that. The capacity for nostalgia is the capacity for love, just extended across time.
It confirms that our lives mattered to us. We mourn what we've lost because it had value. It's how we honor what was. And this brings us back to that final central paradox. Nostalgia is most powerful when it's most false, most meaningful when it's most fabricated, most true when it's most dishonest.
Because the truth it tells isn't really about the past.
The absolute truth it tells is about now, what you value today, what you feel you've lost today, what you are still searching for in your real current life. It's an emotional compass reminding you that you lived intensely, and despite the passage of time, you still remember the ache.
And that, the research suggests, is not nothing. That might be everything.
Which leads us to the final provocative thought we want to leave you with. We are now trapped in this constant state of living and archiving. We are so often documenting our present through the filtered lens of its future nostalgic value, crafting the perfect artifact for our future self to admire, that we're missing the moment itself. If we keep experiencing the present only for its future nostalgic significance, are we already incapable of having genuine, unfiltered memories worth saving? Or is this just the next evolution of human experience? Is documenting life to ensure future nostalgia actively destroying the very thing we're trying to save?